In the bitter winter of 873, Runa Sigurdsdottir stumbled through the snow-laden forests of Northumbria, her swollen belly a testament to the life within her, and the village she had left behind in ashes. She was the sole survivor of a brutal Saxon raid on her settlement, her husband's blood still dried beneath her fingernails from closing his eyes one final time. Fate had cruel designs that day, sparing a woman with child while claiming the lives of battle-hardened warriors. But destiny is woven in patterns beyond mortal understanding, for the woman who carried only death in her memories would soon cross paths with a man who tracked only ghosts, a Norse scout who had lost everything but his skill to hunt. Before we continue this tale, tell us where you're listening from, and if this story touches your heart, remember to subscribe. For tomorrow I've prepared something extraordinary for your ears. The January snow fell mercilessly as Runa forced her feet forward through the drifts. 3 days had passed since she had fled the smoking ruins of Ravnholm, the small Norse settlement where she had lived since her marriage 2 summers ago. Ravnholm had been prosperous, a community of farmers, craftsmen, and warriors who had settled in this foreign land, building lives on soil and ocean away from their ancestral home. Her husband, Bjorn, had been the settlement's blacksmith, a man with hands as gentle with her as they were powerful at the forge. The Saxons had come at dawn, when the winter mist still clung to the ground like a shroud, not warriors from the armies of King Alfred, but marauders, lawless men seeking plunder from those they considered invaders on their land. The irony was not lost on Runa, even in her grief. Her people had been the raiders once, arriving in great ships to claim what wasn't theirs. Now they had tasted the bitter mead of their own making. Runa had been collecting water when the first screams pierced the morning quiet. The creek ran far enough from the settlement that the attackers hadn't seen her. She had dropped her bucket and rushed back, only to witness horror unfolding before her. Men she had known since childhood fell beneath Saxon blades. Women fought desperately to protect children. Buildings that had sheltered them through harsh winters now served as funeral pyres. She had found Bjorn near their home, 3 Saxon arrows protruding from his chest, his sword still gripped in his dying hand. He had lived long enough to look upon her face one last time, to whisper for her to run, to save their unborn child. His final act had been to press his father's silver arm ring into her palm, a treasure meant for their son or daughter who would now never know their father. "Keep moving," Runa murmured to herself, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. 1 foot before the other. She had no clear destination, only away. Away from the Saxons who might still hunt survivors. Away from the charred remains of everyone she had ever loved. Her only possession beyond the clothes on her back was a small knife tucked into her belt, Bjorn's arm ring secured around her upper arm, and the child that kicked within her womb, growing more insistent as if sensing its mother's desperation. The raw forest had become both sanctuary and prison. It sheltered her from searching eyes, but offered little comfort against the winter's bitter embrace. Food had been scarce. A handful of winter berries here, bark stripped from trees there. Hunger gnawed at her relentlessly, weakening her already exhausted body. Still, Runa forced herself onward, one hand supporting her belly, the other using a makeshift walking stick to keep her balance in the treacherous snow. As dusk approached on this 3rd day, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that promised a deadly night, Runa spotted a small hollow beneath the sprawling roots of an ancient oak. It wasn't much, but it would shield her from the wind and hide her from any passing threats. She crawled inside, her limbs shaking with exhaustion and cold, and curled around her swollen belly as best she could. "We will survive this," she whispered to her unborn child. "Your father named you Freya if you are a girl, for the goddess of life. Leif if you are a boy, for the ancestor who first sailed west. You will live to honor these names." Runa's eyes grew heavy as the last light faded from the forest. Sleep came in fitful waves, broken by the child's movements and the constant gnawing hunger. In that space between wakefulness and dreams, her mind drifted to memories of home, of her father's hall in the fjords of Norway, of her mother's songs, of the day she had first seen Bjorn at the midsummer gathering, his eyes reflecting the celebration fires. Dreams shifted to nightmares, screams echoing across Ravnholm, flames consuming all she had known, Bjorn's blood seeping into the frozen ground. She woke with a start, heart pounding, to find tears frozen on her cheeks. The night had deepened. Around her, the moon casting silver light through the branches above. And something had changed. She was being watched. Runa's hand moved slowly to the knife at her belt. Her eyes strained against the darkness, searching for what her instincts had already detected. There, a shadow among shadows, unnaturally still at the edge of a clearing 20 paces from her hiding place. Not an animal. A man. He stood motionless, tall and broad-shouldered against the moonlit snow. From this distance, she could make out, little beyond his silhouette, a fur-trimmed cloak, a hood pulled low over his face, the distinctive shape of a bow slung across his back. Saxon or Norse? Friend or foe? Runa held her breath. If she remained perfectly still, perhaps he would move on, unaware of her presence beneath the oak roots. Her hand tightened around the knife's handle, though she harbored no illusions about her chances against a warrior if it came to that. Still, she would die fighting if it meant giving her child even the slimmest chance at survival. The figure took a step forward, then another, moving with the silent grace of a practiced hunter. Not toward her hiding place, but parallel to it, scanning the forest floor, tracking, following a trail that Runa suddenly realized with horror must be her own. The footprints she had left in the snow would lead him directly to her, as if confirming her fears. The man stopped, turned his head and looked directly at the hollow where she hid. Even in the darkness, Runa felt the weight of his gaze. With deliberate slowness, he reached up and lowered his hood. The moonlight revealed a face that belonged neither to nightmare nor to salvation. A Norse face, to be sure. Strong-featured, with a beard streaked with premature gray, but marked by something Runa recognized instantly. Grief. It was etched into the lines around his eyes, carved into the set of his jaw. This was a man who had lost as she had lost. He approached the oak with measured steps, stopping a respectful distance away. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse, but carried the familiar cadence of her mother tongue. "You can come out," he said in Norse. "I mean you no harm." Runa remained frozen, knife clutched in her trembling hand. "How do I know that to be true?" she called back, her voice barely above a whisper. The man lowered himself to one knee in the snow, setting down, his bow in a gesture of peace. "I am Håkon Eriksson of Skjalvik. I track for Jarl Magnus of Jorvik." He paused, eyes moving to take in her hiding place. "You are with child and alone in these woods. Whatever your story, leaving you here would be a death sentence. I cannot do that." "There are worse fates than death," Runa replied, still not moving from her shelter. A shadow of something, understanding, perhaps, crossed Hakon's weathered face. "Yes, there are. I have seen them." He was silent for a moment before, continuing. "The nearest Saxon village is 2 days' journey south. The nearest Norse settlement is 4 days north. You will reach neither in your condition without aid." As if to punctuate his words, a wolf's howl echoed in the distance, answered by another closer by. Håkon glanced in the direction of the sound. "The wolves have been bold this winter. Hunger makes predators of us all." He returned his gaze to Runa. "I have shelter, food, fire. You need not speak your name or your story if you do not wish to, but you cannot stay here." Runa weighed her options, though in truth there were few to consider. The cold had seeped into her bones. Hunger had weakened her beyond reason. And the child, Bjorn's child, deserved a chance at life that the merciless winter would surely deny if she remained. "If you intended harm," she said finally, "you would not waste words when I am in no position to fight." Hakon nodded solemnly. "True enough." With painful slowness, Runa emerged from beneath the oak roots, knife still in hand. Standing at her full height, no small feat with her advanced pregnancy, she faced the tracker across the snow. "I am Runa Sigurdsdottir," she said, her voice gathering strength with her name. "Once of Ravnholm." Recognition flickered in Hakon's eyes. "Ravnholm," he repeated softly. "Word reached Jorvik 3 days ago. The settlement was destroyed," Runa finished. "For him. Everyone killed, or so the Saxons believed." Hakon's gaze moved to her swollen belly, understanding dawning. "You escaped." "I was not there when it began. When I returned," she couldn't finish. The memories were too raw, too close to the surface. Hakon did not press. Instead, he gathered his bow and gestured northward. "My camp is an hour's walk from here. Can you manage it?" Runa straightened her back. "I have managed 3 days in this forest with nothing but this knife and my wits. I can manage an hour more." The ghost of a smile touched Hakon's lips, the first suggestion that such an expression was still possible for him. "I do not doubt it. Still, the path is treacherous in the dark." He extended a hand toward her. "I offer assistance, not because I believe you weak, but because the ground beneath us shows no mercy to any who fall." After a moment's hesitation, Runa accepted his outstretched hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from a lifetime of bowstrings and hard labor. As he helped her navigate through the deepening snow, she noticed details about him she had missed in the darkness. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down his cheek, disappearing into his beard. He moved with a slight unevenness to his gait, an old injury perhaps. Most telling was the raven feather secured to a leather cord around his neck, a symbol of Odin, the god of death and wisdom. A marker of someone who walked with grief as a constant companion. They traveled in silence through the moonlit forest, Hakon occasionally pausing to listen for sounds that Runa's ears couldn't detect. Twice he changed their direction subtly, though she couldn't discern why. After what seemed much longer than the promised hour, a small clearing appeared ahead, and within it, a structure unlike any Runa had expected. Rather than a simple hunter's lean-to, Hakon had constructed a substantial shelter against the base of a rocky outcropping. Half cave, half built, it was crafted with the expertise of someone who had spent years in the wilderness. A small corral to one side housed 2 horses, their breaths forming clouds in the cold air. "You set a camp," Runa remarked as they approached. "This is nearly a homestead." "I have been tracking in these forests for many seasons," Hakon replied, leading her toward the entrance. "Each year I add to it. The Jarl's men joke that I prefer trees to people." He pushed aside the hide covering the doorway and gestured for her to enter. Perhaps they are not entirely wrong. The interior was surprisingly warm, heated by a small fire pit with smoke rising through a cleverly constructed chimney in the rock above. Furs lined the walls and floor, keeping the winter chill at bay. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters alongside cured meats and fish. It was the dwelling of someone who understood survival not as a temporary state, but as a way of life. "Sit," Hakon said, indicating a pile of furs near the fire. "Rest. I will prepare food." Runa lowered herself gratefully onto the soft pelts, her body protesting after days of cold and exertion. The warmth of the fire began to thaw her frozen limbs, bringing with it the painful prickling of returning circulation. As feeling returned, to her fingers and toes, exhaustion swept over her in an overwhelming wave. Hakon moved about the shelter with practiced efficiency, placing a pot of snow over the fire to melt, adding dried meat and herbs to create a simple stew. He worked in silence, his movements suggesting this was a routine long established. "You live here alone?" Runa asked, breaking the quiet that had stretched between them. Håkon nodded without looking up from his task. "For 5 winters now." "And before that?" His hand stilled momentarily over the pot. "Before that, I had a wife, 2 sons." He resumed his preparations, his voice carefully neutral. "They are with the gods now." Runa did not press further. She understood too well the wounds that lay beneath such simple statements. Instead, she watched as he worked, noting the practiced precision of his movements, the way he seemed to anticipate each need before it arose. When he handed her a wooden bowl of steaming stew, she accepted it with genuine gratitude. The food was simple but nourishing: venison, wild onions, and some root vegetables she couldn't identify, all simmered to tenderness. Runa hadn't realized how desperate her hunger had become until the first spoonful touched her lips. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing her empty stomach might rebel against sudden abundance. "The child's father?" Håkon asked, after she had eaten half the bowl, his question hanging in the air between them. Runa set her spoon down, her appetite suddenly diminished. "My husband, Bjorn Haraldsson. He was Ravnholm's blacksmith." She touched the silver arm ring beneath her sleeve. "He died defending our home." Håkon nodded solemnly. "A worthy death." "There is no worthy death," Runa replied, a sudden edge to her voice. "Only death. He should be here, preparing to meet his child. Building cradles and toy swords, growing old by my side. There is nothing worthy in his absence." Rather than taking offense at her sharp response, Hakon's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Forgive me. It is the thing we Norse say to comfort ourselves when those we love are taken too soon. I, of all people, should know better than to offer such hollow comfort." The admission hung between them, a bridge of understanding built on shared loss. Runa felt her anger dissipate, replaced by a weariness that seemed to reach into her very soul. "When is the child due?" Håkon asked, changing the subject. Runa placed a hand on her swollen belly. "With the first thaw, perhaps sooner. It grows, restless these past days, as if eager to see the world that took its father. Children have no concept of the darkness into which they are born," Håkon observed. "Perhaps that is their greatest strength." They lapsed into silence again as Runa finished her meal. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the shelter. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the trees and rattling the hide covering the entrance. The storm Runa had felt approaching all day had finally arrived. "You should rest," Håkon said, taking her empty bowl. "Tomorrow we will decide what path lies before you." As if conjured by his words, exhaustion swept over Runa in an overwhelming wave. "What do you mean by path?" she asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. "Jorvik lies 4 days north," Håkon explained, arranging additional furs into a sleeping pallet at a respectful distance from his own. "The Jarl would grant you protection as a survivor of Ravnholm. Or there are smaller settlements closer by that might take you in." The thought of facing strangers, of explaining her story, of being the object of pity or suspicion, filled Runa with dread. But what choice did she have? A woman alone with a newborn could not survive the wilderness, especially with winter's grip still tight upon the land. "I will consider it," she said finally, though in truth, she had no clear sense of what she wanted beyond survival for her child. Håkon seemed to understand her uncertainty. Dawn brings clearer thoughts. Sleep now. Runa allowed herself to be guided to the sleeping firs. As she lay down, the aches of the past days made themselves known with renewed intensity. But the warmth and relative safety of the shelter worked like a powerful draft. Within moments, her eyes grew heavy, and she surrendered to sleep more profound than any she had known since fleeing Ravnholm. Her last conscious thought was of Bjorn, not as she had last seen him, broken and dying in the snow, but as he had been in life, laughing at the forge, his hands blackened with soot, his eyes alight with love when they fell upon her. In the space between wakefulness and dreams, she could almost believe he watched over her still, guiding her path through the dark forest of grief that stretched before her. The dreams that came were not of fire and death as she had feared, but of a raven soaring above a fjord, its wings outstretched against a sky heavy with snow. It called to her in a voice that seemed almost human, speaking words just beyond her understanding. When she reached out toward it, the bird transformed into a child running along the shore, leaving tiny footprints in the sand that were washed away by the incoming tide. Runa woke with a start, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. For one terrible moment she thought herself back in Ravnholm on the morning of the attack. Then reality reasserted itself. The warm furs around her, the glowing embers of the fire, the quiet sounds of the forest beyond the shelter's walls. And Hakon, seated by the fire, carving something from a piece of wood with methodical precision. The thin shavings curled and fell into the embers, briefly flaring before turning to ash. He hadn't noticed her wakening, his focus entirely on the task before him. In the soft glow of the fire, with his guard lowered in what he believed to be solitude, Runa saw not the formidable tracker who had found her in the darkness, but a man hollowed out by loss. His shoulders, strong as they were, carried a burden visible only in moments like these. His hands, capable of knocking an arrow or building a shelter, moved with the gentleness of someone who remembered softer times. Whatever twist of fate had led him to find her in that vast forest, Runa suddenly felt certain it had not been mere chance. The gods, cruel as they often were, sometimes wove threads of destiny that bound the broken together, creating strength where there had been only fragments. With that thought, she closed her eyes once more, allowing sleep to reclaim her. Tomorrow would bring decisions and paths forward. But for tonight, in this unexpected sanctuary, she would rest and gather strength for whatever lay ahead. Dawn broke with reluctant gray light, filtering through the hide-covered window of Hakon's shelter. Runa opened her eyes to find herself alone, the fire freshly stoked and a wooden cup of steaming liquid placed nearby. She sat up carefully, her body stiff from days of hardship despite the night's rest on soft furs. The cup contained a bitter tea made from pine needles and some herb she couldn't identify. Runa drank it slowly, feeling warmth spread through her limbs. The child within her stirred, a reassuring movement after the terror of recent days. The hide covering the entrance rustled as Hakon ducked inside, bringing with him the sharp scent of winter air. Snow dusted his shoulders and beard, and in his hands he carried several plucked birds, ptarmigan by the look of them, their winter-white feathers blending with the snow outside. "You're awake," he observed, moving to hang the birds from a hook, by the fire pit. The storm passed in the night. The forest is quiet. "Thank you," Runa said, raising the cup slightly. "For this. For everything." Hakon acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, then busied himself preparing the birds for cooking. His movements were economical, practiced. A man who had performed these tasks thousands of times. "How did you come to be a tracker for Jarl Magnus?" Runa asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Hakon's hands paused briefly in their work before resuming. "It is a skill I have always had," he replied. "Even as a boy in Norway, I could read the land, follow trails others couldn't. See?" He separated meat from bone with quick, precise cuts. "After I lost my family, it seemed fitting to pursue a solitary path." What happened to them? The question slipped out before Runa could consider its propriety. She immediately regretted her forwardness. "Forgive me. You need not speak of it." "Disease," Hakon said after a long moment, his voice flat. "A fever that swept through our settlement 5 winters ago. First, my youngest son, Ulf. Then my eldest, Torstein. My wife, Sigrid, lasted longest, nursing them until her own strength failed." His knife continued its work, though Runa noticed the slight tremor in his hands. "I was away, tracking for the Jarl. When I returned, they were preparing the funeral." "Pyres!" Runa closed her eyes briefly, feeling the immensity of his loss. "The gods can be cruel beyond measure." "The gods had nothing to do with it," Håkon replied, an edge to his voice. "It was a fever. Nothing more, nothing less. If I had been there, if I had sought the healer sooner—" He let the thought hang unfinished. "You cannot know that," Runa said softly. "I cannot know otherwise," he countered. Then, as if regretting his sharpness, he added in a gentler tone, "What of you? How did you come to Ravnholm?" Grateful for the shift in focus, Runa settled back against the firs. "I was born in western Norway, near Stavanger. My father was a respected shipbuilder with connections to many jarls. He arranged my marriage to Bjorn 2 summers ago, more for alliance than affection." A small smile touched her lips. "But affection grew quickly. Bjorn was—" She searched for the right words. "A good man. Kind in ways warriors often are not. His hands could shape metal into things of beauty, and he treated me with the same care he showed his craft." "Ravnholm was his settlement?" "No. We lived first in Jorvik, but Bjorn wanted land of his own, a place to build something lasting. When we heard of Ravnholm, a new settlement needing a blacksmith, it seemed ordained by the Norns themselves." Runa's hand moved to her belly. "I had been trying to conceive since our marriage. It was only after we moved to Ravnholm that the gods blessed us with this child." Håkon set aside his knife, the birds prepared for cooking. "You have family remaining in Jorvik or Norway?" Runa shook her head. "My mother died birthing my younger brother, who himself didn't survive childhood. My father was killed in a dispute over a shipbuilding contract 3 winters past. I have cousins in Norway, perhaps, but none I've seen since girlhood." "So you are truly alone," Håkon said, not unkindly. "As are you," Runa replied, meeting his gaze directly. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared solitude that needed no further acknowledgement. Håkon broke the moment by turning his attention to the fire, arranging the birds on skewers above the flames. "You should eat well today," he said. "Regain your strength. There's a settlement 2 days' ride from here, smaller than Jorvik but well established. Ashby, it's called. The headman there, Gunnar Thorvaldsson, is fair-minded. He would give shelter to a widow with child." "You seem eager to be rid of me," Runa observed, though there was no accusation in her tone. Håkon looked up, genuinely surprised. "Not at all. But this is no place for a woman in your condition. My shelter is crude, far from any midwife or healer. When your time comes—" He left the implications unspoken. Runa understood his concern, practical as it was. Yet the thought of facing another new settlement, explaining her story, becoming an object of pity, it filled her with a weariness deeper than physical exhaustion. "I cannot impose on your solitude indefinitely," she acknowledged. "But perhaps just a few days, until I have regained enough strength for the journey?" Relief flickered in Håkon's eyes, so briefly Runa might have imagined it. "Of course. The weather is not ideal for travel anyway. Rest, recover, there is no hurry." They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, the ptarmigan tender and flavorful, after days of near starvation. Afterward, despite Hakon's protests, Runa insisted on helping with the small tasks around the shelter, mending a torn cloak she found among his belongings, organizing the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, preparing more pine needle tea. "You should rest," Håkon said, watching as she worked a bone needle through the thick woolen fabric of his cloak. "I have rested," Runa replied, not looking up from her stitches. Idle hands invite dark thoughts. Besides, I've been tending my own home since I was 12 winters old. Pregnancy hasn't rendered me helpless. Haakon's mouth quirked in what might have almost been a smile. I would not dare suggest otherwise. As the day progressed, Runa observed Haakon in his element. He moved through his daily tasks with quiet efficiency, checking traps, tending to his horses, preparing materials for arrows. Occasionally he would disappear into the forest, returning with kindling or fresh water, or once, surprisingly, a handful of wintergreen berries he presented to her without ceremony. For the child, he explained gruffly when she looked at him questioningly. My wife craved tart flavors when she carried our sons. The small gesture touched Runa deeply. This man, who had walled himself away from human connection for 5 years, still remembered such intimate details of family life, still honored them in his actions. As evening approached, Haakon prepared to check his more distant traps. I won't be long, he assured her, slinging his bow across his back. The fire should last, but wood is there if needed. He hesitated at the entrance. Will you be comfortable alone? Runa recognized the real question beneath his words. Did she feel safe? Did she trust him enough to remain in his shelter unguarded? The fact that he considered her feelings in this matter spoke volumes. I will be fine, she replied simply. The forest holds no more terrors for me than it did yesterday. Haakon nodded, satisfied, and ducked through the entrance. Through the hide-covered window, Runa watched his tall figure disappear among the trees, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged to the wilderness. Alone in the shelter, Runa continued her mending, occasionally rising to stretch her legs or add wood to the fire. Despite the lingering grief and trauma of recent days, she felt a curious peace in this simple space. Perhaps it was the absence of judging eyes or pitying glances. Perhaps it was simply having fundamental needs met after days of desperate survival. Her hands moved instinctively to her belly as the child shifted within her. You're restless today, she murmured. You sense we're safe, at least for now. The thought brought both comfort and fear. Safety was temporary. She knew that better than most, but for her child's sake, she would grasp whatever security she could find. Runa was hanging the mended cloak near the fire when a sound outside froze her in place. The soft crunch of footsteps in snow, too light to be Haakon's deliberate tread. Her heart quickened as she reached for her knife, pressing herself against the wall beside the entrance. The footsteps stopped just outside. Then a voice, high and clear, distinctly not Haakon's. Hello? Is anyone there? The speaker was a woman, her Norse accented but understandable. Runa hesitated, knife still clutched, in her hand. It could be a trap. Saxons sometimes used women as bait to lure out isolated Norse settlers. I saw the smoke, the voice continued. Please, I mean no harm. I'm separated from my trading party. The storm. Runa made her decision. Keeping the knife ready, she pushed aside the hide covering and peered out. A young woman stood several paces from the entrance, her cloak dusted with snow, cheeks reddened by cold. She was perhaps Runa's age or slightly younger, with fiery red hair partially visible beneath her hood. What struck Runa most, however, was that she was clearly with child herself, though not as far along as Runa. Oh, thank the gods, the woman breathed, visible relief washing over her features. I feared I'd imagined the smoke. Her eyes took in Runa's pregnant form. Are you alone out here? No, Runa replied cautiously, not lowering her knife. The man who built this shelter will return shortly. Who are you? Freydis Edda's daughter, the woman answered. I'm a cloth merchant. I was traveling with my husband's trading party from Jorvik to Lundenwick when the storm separated us yesterday. She gestured vaguely eastward. I've been wandering since dawn, hoping to find the road again. Runa studied the woman carefully. Her clothes were indeed of good quality, and the brooch fastening her cloak was finely crafted silver, consistent with a successful merchant's wife. Still, caution prevailed. "Your husband searches for you?" A shadow crossed Freydis's face. "If he's able. Our party was attacked by brigands during the storm. In the confusion, I fled into the forest." She hugged her arms around herself, shivering visibly. "I don't know who survived." The familiar tale of violence and separation stirred. Runa's sympathy overcoming her suspicion, she stepped aside, gesturing toward the shelter's interior. "Come inside. Warm yourself. I cannot promise more until the tracker returns, but you needn't freeze while waiting." Gratitude flooded Freydis's face as she hurried inside, moving straight to the fire with the desperation of someone truly chilled to the bone. Runa watched her carefully as she closed the entrance behind them. "You're Norse," Freydis observed, holding her hands out to the flames. "I feared I might encounter Saxons out here. They've grown bold this winter, attacking settlements and trading. Parties alike." "I know," Runa said quietly. "I am from Ravnholm." Freydis's head snapped up, recognition and horror dawning in her eyes. "Ravnholm? But I heard everyone was—" "I was away when the attack began," Runa explained, the familiar pain clenching her heart. "By the time I returned, it was too late for anyone but myself." "By the gods," Freydis whispered. "We heard the news in Jorvik 3 days ago. A survivor from a nearby settlement brought word." She studied Runa with new understanding. "You lost your husband?" Runa nodded, not trusting herself to speak of Bjorn aloud. "As I may have lost mine," Freydis said softly, one hand moving to her own swollen belly. "Halfdan is a skilled fighter, but they came upon us so suddenly in the midst of the storm." She trailed off, blinking rapidly against threatening tears. The parallel of their situations was not lost on Runa. Though different in circumstance, both women stood on the precipice of motherhood while facing the possible loss of their children's fathers. The recognition forged an immediate bond between them, transcending caution. "This shelter belongs to a man named Håkon," Runa explained, lowering herself to sit near the fire. "He found me in the forest yesterday, half frozen and starving. He's a tracker for Jarl Magnus of Jorvik." "Håkon Eriksson?" Freydis asked, surprise evident in her voice. "The Raven Tracker," Runa frowned. "He didn't give that name, just Håkon of Skjalvik." "It must be the same man," Freydis insisted. "Everyone in Jorvik knows of him. They say he lost his entire family to sickness and now lives alone in the wilderness, tracking for the Jarl, but avoiding human company." She glanced around the shelter with new appreciation. "They say he can find anything or anyone, but he speaks only when absolutely necessary. Some claim he made a bargain with Odin himself for his tracking skills, trading his happiness for the ability to find what others cannot." Runa considered the Håkon she had come to know in their brief acquaintance. A grieving man, certainly, but no supernatural figure. "People create legends to explain what they don't understand," she said. "His skill comes from practice and observation, not bargains with gods." Freydis looked unconvinced but didn't argue. Instead, she asked, "Will he help me find my trading party, or guide me to Jorvik?" "You can ask him yourself," Runa replied, hearing the familiar tread of footsteps outside. "He returns now." The hide covering was pushed aside as Håkon entered, a brace of rabbits in one hand. He stopped abruptly at the sight of Freydis, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "We have a guest," Runa explained, rising to her feet. "Freydis Eddisdottir, separated from her trading party during the storm. She saw the smoke from your fire." Håkon studied the red-haired woman with the careful assessment of a practiced tracker. His gaze noted her quality clothing, her pregnancy, the absence of any weapons, the genuine exhaustion in her posture. "Your trading party," he said finally, hanging the rabbits beside the birds from earlier. Where were they headed? Londonwick, Freydis replied. We were following the old Roman road when brigands attacked during the storm. I became separated in the chaos. Brigands? Or Saxons? I couldn't tell. It was dark, snowing heavily. They came from the trees without warning. Freydis's voice trembled slightly. My husband, Halfdan, ordered me to run while he and the others fought. Hakon considered this information, his expression unreadable. The old Roman road lies half a day's journey east of here. If your party survived, they would continue south or return to Jorvik. Can you help me find them? Freydis asked, hope evident in her voice. I can pay well. My husband would reward you generously. A certain tension crept into Hakon's posture at her request. I am not for hire, he said flatly. I track for Jarl Magnus alone. Freydis's face fell, her hand moving, unconsciously to her belly. Then, could you at least guide me to Jorvik? I have family there who would shelter me until word of my husband can be found. Hakon glanced at Runa, something unspoken passing between them. It is a 4-day journey to Jorvik, he said finally. Not one to be undertaken lightly in your condition. In this weather. I understand the risks, Freydis insisted, but I cannot stay in these woods indefinitely. And if my husband lives, he will return to Jorvik to search for me. Runa saw the conflict in Hakon's face, his reluctance to abandon, the solitude he had cultivated so carefully versus the moral obligation to help a pregnant woman in distress. She understood both impulses intimately. Perhaps, Runa suggested carefully, we might all journey to Ashby first. It's closer, as you said. We could rest there, perhaps find news of Freydis's trading party, then continue to Jorvik if necessary. Hakon considered the suggestion, visibly turning it over in his mind. Ashby, he repeated. Yes, that would be wiser. 2 pregnant women traveling through winter forest. He seemed to reach a decision. We will leave for Ashby when the weather allows. 2 days, perhaps 3. Freydis's relief was palpable. Thank you, she breathed. Truly. The gods guided me to your smoke today. The gods had nothing to do with it, Hakon muttered, turning his attention to preparing the rabbits for cooking. Simple luck, good or ill, depending on your perspective. Night descended fully upon the forest. The 3 unlikely companions shared a meal of rabbit stew. The shelter, comfortable for 2, was crowded with 3, but not unpleasantly so. Hakon arranged the sleeping furs to give both women as much comfort as possible, himself taking only a thin blanket near the door. You'll freeze there, Runa protested when she saw his arrangement. I've endured colder nights with less, he replied, simply ending the discussion. As they settled for sleep, Runa found herself studying the tracker's profile in the dying firelight. This man, who by all accounts had closed himself off from human connection years ago, had now taken in not 1 but 2 pregnant women in distress. Whatever walls he had built around his heart, they were not impermeable. Perhaps, Runa thought as sleep began to claim her, there was hope for her own heart as well. If Hakon could find space within his grief to offer kindness to strangers, perhaps she too could eventually find a path forward through her own loss. The child moved within her, a gentle reminder of life's persistence even in the face of death. Runa placed her hand over the movement, silently promising her unborn child that somehow, together, they would find their way. Morning arrived with thaw, unexpected clemency, clear skies and gentler winds than the previous days had brought. Runa woke to find Freydis already up, quietly speaking with Hakon near the fire. They fell silent as she stirred, exchanging a glance that immediately raised her suspicions. What is it? Runa asked, pushing herself to a sitting position with effort. Hakon met her gaze directly. There are tracks near the stream, fresh, from at least 4 men. Saxons? The word carried all her fear. Or the brigands who attacked Fridas's trading party, Hakon replied, his voice deliberately neutral. Either way, we should not linger. A cold knot formed in Runa's stomach. The memory of Ravnholm's destruction was still too fresh. The wounds, too raw. You believe they're hunting us? Hunting someone, Hakon corrected, handing her a cup of steaming pine needle tea. The tracks suggest they're searching, not passing through. Freydis wrapped her arms around herself, face pale. If it's the same brigands, they may have followed me. I thought I was careful. It's not your fault, Runa said quickly, seeing the guilt in the younger woman's eyes. You were fleeing for your life. Hakon rose and began gathering essential supplies, dried meat, water skins, extra furs. We'll leave within the hour. Travel light. Head directly for Ashby. Will they not follow our trail? Freydis asked, voice small with fear. A ghost of a smile touched Hakon's lips. Not if I don't wish them to. The casual confidence in his statement carried no boast, only simple fact. They prepared swiftly, Hakon's efficiency directing their efforts. He helped the women onto his 2 horses, opting to lead them on foot. I'll move faster this way, he explained when Runa protested, and can better obscure our trail. True to his word, Hakon employed tricks of tracking and anti-tracking that Runa could barely comprehend. He led them through rocky outcroppings where hooves left no prints, across shallow streams that washed away their scent, occasionally doubling back to lay false trails before returning to their true path. Throughout, he maintained a vigilant watch, sometimes stopping abruptly, head tilted as if listening for sounds beyond human hearing. By midday, even Runa's untrained eye could see they were being pursued. Hakon spotted the signs first, a broken branch here, disturbed snow there, glimpses of movement far behind them. Their pursuers were skilled, perhaps guided by a tracker of their own. We cannot outrun them indefinitely, Hakon admitted during a brief rest. Not with... He glanced at their pregnant forms. With us slowing you down, Runa finished for him, a bitter taste in her mouth. Once again, her condition made her vulnerable, dependent on others for survival. Hakon's expression softened unexpectedly. I was going to say, not with night approaching. Your presence is not a burden, Runa Sigurdsdottir, merely a factor to consider in our strategy. The simple dignity with which he spoke her full name, acknowledging her as a person rather than a responsibility, warmed Runa despite the growing danger. What is our strategy? Freydis asked, one hand protectively over her stomach. Hakon considered for a moment. There's an abandoned farmstead half a day's ride from here. We'll shelter there tonight. Its position offers better defense than open forest. They pressed on, the winter sun already beginning its early descent toward the horizon. Runa felt the child within her shifting restlessly, responding to her tension and the constant movement of the horse beneath her. She murmured soothing words, as much for herself as for her unborn child. As promised, they reached the abandoned farmstead as dusk painted the sky in deepening shades of purple and gray. It was a simple structure, a longhouse fallen partially to ruin. Its roof collapsed at one end, but the remaining portion intact enough to provide shelter. A crude fence surrounded what had once been animal pens, now empty save for encroaching forest undergrowth. What happened here? Runa asked as Hakon helped her dismount. The inhabitants left 2 winters ago. Failed crops, I believe. Or perhaps Saxon raids. Hakon surveyed the property with a tactical eye. The remaining structure is defensible. 1 entrance. Walls still solid. Inside, the longhouse retained vestiges of its former occupants. A stone hearth, broken pottery, a child's wooden toy discarded. In a corner, Runa felt ghosts in the shadows, the echoes of a family not unlike her own in Ravnholm. Had they fled in terror as she had? Or simply abandoned their home when survival became too difficult? Hakon worked quickly to secure the space, clearing debris, establishing a small fire in the hearth, positioning the horses where they could be quickly reached if needed. His movements were precise, practiced, those of a man who had assessed threats and planned escapes many times before. "You've done this before," Runa observed, helping as much as her condition allowed. Håkon nodded without looking up from his work. "The forest has many dangers, not all of them animal." "You fought in the Great Army, didn't you?" Freydis asked, suddenly. "When our people invaded these lands," Håkon's hand stilled momentarily. "Yes, many years ago, under Ivar the Boneless." His voice carried a weight Runa couldn't quite decipher, not pride, not shame, but something more complex. "I was younger then, believed glory awaited in battle." "And did it?" Runa asked softly. "I found only blood, others and my own." He touched the jagged scar that ran down his face unconsciously. "Glory is a story we tell ourselves to justify slaughter." The bitterness in his words silenced both women. Here was a deeper layer to the tracker, not merely a man grieving family lost to disease, but one who had seen war's true face and found it wanting. Night fell fully outside, bringing with it an oppressive silence. No owls called, no creatures rustled in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The unnatural quiet raised the hair on Runa's arms. "They're close," Håkon confirmed, reading her expression. He moved to extinguish their small fire. No light, no sound. In the sudden darkness, Runa felt Freydis's hand find hers, squeezing tightly. The younger woman trembled slightly but made no sound. Håkon positioned himself near the entrance, bow ready, listening intently to the night beyond. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Runa's back ached from sitting tensely on the dirt floor, but she dared not move. The silence grew so complete, she could hear her own heartbeat, the soft sounds of Freydis's frightened breathing, the almost imperceptible creak of Håkon's bowstring as he adjusted his grip. Then, a sound. Subtle at first, just the faintest crunch of snow beneath a careful foot. Another followed, then another. Their pursuers had found them. Håkon held up a hand, signaling for absolute stillness. He peered through a narrow gap in the wooden walls, his body coiled with controlled tension. Runa counted at least 4 distinct patterns of footsteps circling the longhouse, probing for weaknesses. A voice spoke in the darkness outside, rough male, speaking Norse with a heavy accent. "We know you're in there, Tracker. The women, too." The voice carried a cruel amusement. "Make this easy. Send out the red-haired one. She belongs to us now. Keep the pregnant one if you wish. We have no use for her." Freydis made a small, choked sound of terror. Runa squeezed her hand reassuringly, though fear coursed through her own veins like ice water. They weren't Saxons then, likely the same brigands who had attacked the trading party. And they wanted Freydis specifically. Håkon's expression revealed nothing as he nocked an arrow. He signaled for the women to move to the farthest corner, away from the entrance and the partially collapsed section of roof. 5 of them, he whispered. When they had complied, his voice so low Runa barely heard it. "Armed, desperate, be ready to run if I tell you." "And leave you?" Runa whispered back, horrified at the suggestion. Hakon's eyes met hers in the darkness, something unspoken passing between them. "If necessary." Before she could protest further, the voice outside called again. No answer. "Tracker?" "Very well. We do this the hard way." A flaming arrow arced through the night, landing on the collapsed portion of the roof. The dry, rotted wood caught quickly, illuminating the interior of the longhouse with flickering orange light. Håkon didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he rose, aimed through the gap in the wall, and released his arrow. A cry of pain outside confirmed his aim was true. "Stay down," he ordered, already knocking another arrow. "When the fire spreads, they'll expect us to flee through the entrance. They'll be waiting." Another flaming arrow struck the roof, and another. Smoke began to fill the longhouse, stinging Runa's eyes and catching in her throat. The horses whinnied, in panic, pulling at their tethers. Hakon fired again, then a third time, each shot followed by cries from outside, but the brigands had numbers on their side. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the ancient timbers of the roof. Soon they would have no choice but to leave the burning structure. "The rear wall," Hakon said suddenly, slinging his bow across his back and drawing his axe. "Behind you. The wood is rotted. We can break through." Runa and Freydis scrambled to the spot he indicated. Indeed, the timbers there had suffered from years of weather and neglect. Hakon attacked the weak point with controlled strength, the axe biting deep into the softened wood. 3 powerful strikes created an opening just large enough for them to squeeze through. "The horses!" Runa protested as Hakon urged them toward the opening. "Lost to us now," he replied grimly. "Our lives matter more." The smoke grew thicker, making it difficult to see, to breathe. Runa helped Freydis through the newly created exit, then followed with Hakon's assistance. The night air outside was blessedly clean by comparison, though the glow from the burning longhouse eliminated any hope of slipping away unseen. They had barely cleared the structure when a shout went up from one of the brigands. "There! Behind! The house!" Hakon pushed the women toward the tree line. "Run! Don't look back!" Runa ran as best she could, one hand supporting her belly, the other pulling Freydis along beside her. Her lungs burned from the smoke. Her legs protested the sudden exertion, but fear drove her forward. Behind them, she heard the clash of weapons, Hakon engaging their pursuers to buy them time. They reached the edge of the forest as an agonized scream pierced the night. Runa froze, turning back despite Hakon's instructions. The burning longhouse cast enough light to see the tracker standing over a fallen brigand, his axe dripping red in the firelight. But even as she watched, another attacker circled behind him, blade raised. "Hakon!" she cried out in warning. The tracker spun at her voice, bringing his axe up just in time to deflect the killing blow. But the movement left his side exposed to a third attacker who drove a knife deep into his ribs. Hakon roared in pain, staggering but not falling. With remarkable fortitude, he swung his axe in a wide arc that forced his attackers back momentarily. Making use of the brief respite, he turned and ran toward the forest, toward the women he had sworn to protect. Blood darkened his tunic, but his eyes remained clear, focused on survival. "Go!" he gasped as he reached them, pushing them deeper into the forest. "They'll follow the blood." Indeed, the remaining brigands were already in pursuit, their torches bobbing through the darkness as they followed the trail Hakon could no longer conceal. The 3 fled into the night, each step a desperate prayer, to gods who had already taken so much from them. Behind them, flames consumed what remained of the abandoned farmstead, erasing one more fragment of human endeavor from the wilderness. Darkness enveloped them as they fled deeper into the forest. Runa's breath came in ragged gasps, her pregnant form not made for such desperate flight. Beside her, Freydis stumbled on unseen roots, whimpering with each faltering step. Behind them, both, Hakon pressed forward through sheer will, one hand clamped to his bleeding side. "We cannot outrun them," Runa managed between labored breaths. "Not like this." Hakon nodded grimly, his face pale even in the darkness. "There's a ravine ahead, with a stream at the bottom. If we can reach it." He didn't need to finish the thought. Water would hide their scent, confuse their trail. It was their only hope of escaping pursuers who knew these woods almost as well as Hakon himself. They pushed onward, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter as the forest's natural obstacles slowed the brigands more than their quarry. Hakon led, them unerringly despite his injury, his instinct for the land undiminished by pain or darkness. The ravine appeared suddenly, a sharp drop-off into blackness. The sound of rushing water echoed from below, swollen by winter melt. Hakon motioned for them to stop, scanning the edge for a safe descent. "There," he whispered, pointing to where the ravine wall sloped more gradually. "Careful, One misstep. Freydis went first, sliding down the slick embankment on her back to protect her belly. Runa followed, heart pounding as loose stones skittered beneath her. Håkon came last, his movements deliberate despite the blood now soaking his tunic. The stream, at the bottom, raged with snowmelt, its icy waters dark and forbidding in the night. Håkon waded in without hesitation, suppressing a gasp as the frigid water reached his wound. He extended a hand to each woman. "The current is strong," he warned. "Hold to me." Together they navigated the treacherous waters, using the stream as both path and shield against those who hunted them. The cold bit deep, numbing Runa's legs and stealing her breath. Yet she pushed forward, one hand gripping Håkon's arm, the other protectively curved around her belly. When they had traveled far enough downstream, Håkon guided them to the opposite bank. Climbing out, their sodden clothes immediately began to freeze in the night air. Hypothermia would claim them as surely as any brigand's blade if they didn't find shelter and warmth soon. "I know a place," Håkon said, his voice weaker than before. "Not far." He led them through the darkness, his steps growing increasingly unsteady. Twice he stumbled, catching himself against tree trunks. The third time, his knees buckled completely. Runa rushed to his side, alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin despite their icy immersion. "You're burning with fever," she said, feeling his brow. Håkon attempted to rise. "We must keep moving." "Not without tending that wound," Runa insisted. "You'll die otherwise." A grim smile touched his lips. "Perhaps that's what the Norns have woven." "Not today," Runa declared with unexpected fierceness. "Not after everything. Where is this shelter you spoke of?" With effort, Håkon pointed through the trees. "There, where the rocks form a cave." The cave proved to be a shallow depression beneath a rocky overhang, but it offered protection from the wind and would hide a small fire from searching eyes. While Freydis gathered what dry kindling she could find beneath the overhang, Runa helped Håkon remove his sodden tunic to examine his wound. It was worse than she had feared. Deep, still, seeping blood, the edges already showing signs of infection. Without proper treatment, death was certain. With their meager resources, it remained likely. "I need thread. A needle," Runa muttered, scanning their few possessions. Håkon reached weakly for his belt pouch, which miraculously had stayed with him through their flight. "Here, always carrying for repairs." Inside, Runa found a bone needle and sinew thread, along with a small flask. She uncorked it, the sharp scent of strong spirits burning her nostrils. "For cleaning wounds," Håkon explained, already shivering violently, "and dulling pain. By the time Freydis managed to start a small, nearly smokeless fire, Håkon had lapsed into semi-consciousness. Runa worked swiftly, cleaning the wound with the spirits, then sewing it closed with neat, practiced stitches. Her mother had taught her healing arts as a girl, though she had never expected to use them under such desperate circumstances. "Will he live?" Freydis asked, huddled close to the fire. Runa wiped blood from her hands, her expression grave. "If infection doesn't claim him, if his strength holds." She arranged their one remaining dry fur around Håkon's shoulders. "Much depends on whether those men find us before dawn." "They seemed to want me specifically," Freydis said quietly, staring into the flames. "Not just any victim." Runa had noticed this too. Why would brigands hunt one woman so determinedly? Freydis hesitated, something flickering in her eyes. I'm not certain. Perhaps they recognize my husband's trading colors. His family is wealthy." The explanation made sense, yet something in Freydis's manner suggested she wasn't being entirely truthful. Runa chose not to press. They had more immediate concerns than unraveling mysteries. Through the long night, they took turns tending Håkon and keeping watch. His fever climbed steadily, his sleep punctuated by muttered words, names perhaps, or prayers to gods he claimed not to believe in. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, Runa feared they would lose him. She bathed his brow with cool water from the stream, willing strength into his failing body. "Live, Hakon Eriksson," she whispered fiercely. "Your time in Valhalla is not yet come." As if hearing her across the gulf of fever, Hakon's eyes flickered open. They were clouded with pain, but recognizably lucid. "Runa," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "if I don't survive—" "Save your strength," she interrupted. "We'll have none of that death talk." A weak smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." His hand found hers, surprisingly strong despite his condition. "Listen. Ashby lies east. Follow. The rising sun. 2 days' walk. Ask for Gunnar Thorvaldsson. Tell him Hakon of Skjalvik sent you. He'll grant you sanctuary." "We'll tell him together," Runa insisted. "When you've recovered enough to travel." Hakon's grip tightened briefly. "Promise. Me? If the worst comes, you won't try to return to Jorvik alone. Ashby first. Safer." The urgent need in his fevered eyes compelled her to nod. "I promise. Now rest. Regain your strength." He relaxed slightly, eyes drifting closed once more. Runa continued to bathe his brow, noting with growing concern how the area around his wound had reddened. Without proper herbs to fight infection, his chances dimmed with each passing hour. Dawn broke fully across the forest, revealing their surroundings in gray winter light. The small cave had served them well, hidden from casual observation by surrounding brush. Freydis had fallen into exhausted sleep near the dying fire, her face troubled even in repose. Runa rose stiffly, her body protesting the night spent on cold ground. The child within her stirred, as if reminding her that survival wasn't optional, it was imperative. She needed to find food, healing herbs if possible. They couldn't remain in this tenuous shelter indefinitely. As she stepped carefully from beneath the overhang, movement in the distance froze her in place. A figure moved through the trees, then another. The brigands had not abandoned their hunt. Somehow they had crossed the stream and were now methodically searching the forest around them. Heart pounding, Runa retreated into the shelter. "Freydis," she hissed, shaking the younger woman awake. "They've found us." Freydis's eyes flew open, wide with fear. "How? The stream should have—" "It doesn't matter how. They're here." Runa glanced at Hakon, still locked in fevered sleep. "He can't travel. Not like this." "We can't leave him," Freydis protested. "And we can't fight." Runa's mind raced, weighing impossible options. "If they want you specifically, perhaps I could lead them away. Give you time to help Hakon to safety." Freydis paled. "They'd kill you. Or worse." "Not if I'm clever." Runa's hand moved to her knife. "Besides, I'm further along than you. Less desirable as a captive. They might simply kill me and be done with it." The brutal pragmatism of her words hung between them. This was the reality. Women faced in a world ruled by strength and violence, calculating which form of male cruelty might prove less fatal. Before Freydis could respond, a sound outside silenced them both. The unmistakable crunch of boots on frozen ground, very near. Their shelter? The brigands had found them. Runa's hand tightened around her knife, her body instinctively shifting to shield both the unconscious Hakon and the frightened Freydis. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied now by the sound of men's voices. Rough, determined, speaking in hushed tones that still carried in the morning stillness. "They can't have gone far," one said in accented Norse. "Not with 2 breeding women and a wounded man." "The tracks lead this way," another replied. "Fresh blood on the stones back there." Runa exchanged a desperate glance with Freydis. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Their small shelter, so well concealed in darkness, would offer little. Protection in daylight from determined hunters. "Stay behind me," Runa whispered, rising to a crouch. If death was coming, she would face it standing, weapon in hand, as her father and husband had done. The footsteps stopped just outside their shelter. Runa could see the shadow of a man through the screen of branches, his outline stark against the morning light. He was leaning forward, examining something on the ground, likely one of their footprints. Any moment now, he would push aside the branches and discover them. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the tension. The distant but unmistakable blast of a war horn, followed by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Many horses riding hard. The brigands outside froze, then erupted into panicked motion. "The Jarl's men," one shouted. "How did they find us?" "Forget the women," commanded another. "Save yourselves." The footsteps retreated hastily, crashing through underbrush with none of their previous stealth. Within moments, the sounds of their flight faded into the forest, replaced by the growing thunder of approaching riders. Runa hardly dared breathe, uncertain if this new development meant salvation, or simply a different form of danger. Saxon raiders? Norse warriors? Either could prove friend or foe depending on their allegiance. The riders drew nearer, the sound of hoofbeats slowing as they approached the area where the brigands had been searching. Orders were shouted in Norse, not the rough dialect of outlaws, but the authoritative commands of trained warriors. "Search the area. They must be nearby." Freydis gasped softly. "I know that voice," she whispered, color returning to her pale cheeks. Before Runa could stop her, she had pushed past the branches, shielding their shelter, and stepped into the open. "Halfdan!" she called, her voice breaking with emotion. "Halfdan, I'm here!" Runa tensed, knife ready, as multiple horses crashed through the underbrush toward Freydis's voice. She prepared to defend their position, uncertain if the younger woman had just doomed them all. The first rider to break into view was a tall, powerfully built man with a flame-red beard to match Freydis's hair. His arm was bandaged, his face scraped and bruised, but his eyes lit with unmistakable relief at the sight of Freydis standing before him. "By all the gods," he breathed, leaping from his horse and rushing to embrace her. "I feared you lost." More riders appeared, a dozen warriors in well-maintained armor, bearing the symbol of a wolf on their shields. Not Jarl's men as the brigands had feared, but a private retinue. Wealthy merchants often traveled with such protection in these dangerous borderlands. Runa remained hidden, watching cautiously as Freydis embraced the red-bearded man, tears streaming down her face. Their reunion seemed genuine, their relief mutual. Perhaps this was indeed Halfdan, the husband Freydis had feared dead. "Where are the others?" Freydis asked, looking around at the warriors. "The women who sheltered me?" Halfdan frowned. "What, women?" "Two survivors from Ravnholm," Freydis explained. "A pregnant widow and a wounded tracker. They saved me from the brigands who attacked our party. The tracker is gravely injured." Halfdan turned toward their shelter. "Show me." Runa made her decision, sheathing her knife and emerging from their hiding place. "I am here," she said, standing as tall as her pregnant form allowed. "The tracker is within, wounded defending us from the men who just fled." Halfdan studied her, with keen eyes, taking in her condition, her bearing, the dried blood on her hands from tending Hakon's wound. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. He nodded respectfully. "My wife says you saved her life. For that, you have my eternal gratitude." He gestured to his men. "Bring the wounded tracker out carefully. We have a healer among us." Two warriors dismounted and entered the shallow cave, emerging moments later bearing Hakon between them. His skin was gray beneath his beard, his breathing shallow. An older man slid from his horse and approached, his cloak marked with symbols of healing. He examined Hakon's wound with practiced hands, his expression grave. "Infection has set in," he announced. "The wound itself is well stitched." He nodded approvingly toward Runa. but fever burns through him. He needs proper care, and soon. Can he be moved? Halfdan asked. The healer considered. With care. On a litter between horses, perhaps. But we must make haste. Our camp is half a day's ride, Halfdan said. We were following the brigands' trail when we found you. Half a day may be too long, the healer warned. Freydis stepped forward, her hand on her husband's arm. Ashby is closer. The tracker told us so himself. 2 days' walk, which means perhaps only hours on horseback. Halfdan nodded decisively. Ashby, then. Prepare a litter for the wounded man. He turned to Runa. You will ride with Knut, he indicated, one of his larger warriors. Your condition requires comfort we cannot provide on the forest floor. Within the hour, they were moving swiftly through the forest. Håkon secured on a litter suspended between 2 horses. Runa, seated before a stoic warrior whose size suggested he might be part giant. Freydis rode with her husband, her head occasionally resting against his shoulder as they spoke in low tones. The brigands who had hunted them so determinedly seemed to have vanished entirely, perhaps fleeing back across the border into Saxon territory. Halfdan's warriors maintained vigilant watch nonetheless, hands never straying far from sword hilts as they rode. Runa's mind raced with unanswered questions. Who exactly was Freydis that brigands would hunt her so persistently? Why? Had Halfdan and his men been following their trail? Most pressing of all, would Håkon survive long enough to reach Ashby and proper care? She glanced back at the tracker, his powerful form now reduced by fever and blood loss. They had known each other barely 3 days, yet in that time he had saved her life repeatedly, asking nothing in return. Such men were rare in this brutal world, men who honored duty above self, who remembered kindness despite loss. Their party rode hard, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and check on Håkon's condition. His fever continued to rise, his mutterings growing more incoherent. By midday, they crested a hill and saw smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. Ashby, a substantial Norse settlement nestled in a protected valley. The settlement was larger than Runa had expected, with a wooden palisade surrounding numerous buildings. As they approached the gates, Halfdan called out his name and business. The gates swung open quickly, suggesting his reputation preceded him. Fetch Gunnar Thorvaldsson, Halfdan ordered as they entered. Tell him Håkon Eriksson requires his aid. They were led to a large longhouse near the center of the settlement. Servants rushed to assist, helping to carry Håkon inside and prepare a bed near the central hearth. A tall, gray-haired man with one eye, presumably Gunnar, directed the efforts, his face grim when he saw Håkon's condition. The raven tracker, he murmured, placing a hand on Håkon's burning brow. What happened? Runa stepped forward, briefly explaining the attack at the farmstead and Håkon's injury defending them. Gunnar listened intently, his single eye sharp with intelligence. You stitched his wound? He asked when she finished. Runa nodded. It wasn't enough. The infection, you likely kept him alive this long, Gunnar interrupted. Few would know to clean a wound with spirits before stitching. He studied her more carefully. You're from Ravnholm. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast, even in this wilderness. I am the only survivor, Runa confirmed, her voice steady despite the pain the words still brought. Gunnar's weathered face softened with genuine sympathy. Then you have suffered enough. He turned to issue orders to waiting servants. Prepare a chamber for the lady. She needs rest, food, care for her child. Runa started to protest, unwilling to leave Håkon's side after everything they had endured together, but her own exhaustion betrayed her. Her legs trembled beneath her, the child within her shifting uncomfortably after the long ride. She allowed herself to be led to a small side chamber where a bed had been hastily prepared. Sleep, urged the serving woman who accompanied her. The master healer tends your friend. Nothing more can be done now, but wait. Despite her concern for Håkon, Runa's body surrendered to exhaustion almost as soon as she lay down. She slept. Deeply, dreamlessly, the kind of restorative sleep that had eluded her since fleeing Ravnholm. When she woke, golden afternoon light streamed through the small window of her chamber. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had come to be in a proper bed. Then memory flooded back. Håkon, the brigands, Halfdan's timely arrival. She rose quickly, straightening her borrowed sleeping gown, and ventured into the main hall. The great room was largely empty save for a few servants and, to her surprise, Freydis seated near the central hearth. The red-haired woman looked up as Runa approached, a genuine smile lighting her face. "You're awake," Freydis said. "Good. They weren't sure how long you'd sleep." "Håkon?" Runa asked immediately. Freydis's smile dimmed slightly. "Still fighting the fever. Gunnar's healer says it's too soon to know." She gestured for Runa to join her on the bench. "Halfdan has gone to speak with Gunnar about arrangements. They've been in council for some time." Runa sat beside Freydis, suddenly aware of her own hunger. As if anticipating this, a servant appeared with bread, cheese, and mead, setting the food before her with a respectful nod. As Runa ate, Freydis explained what she had learned during Runa's sleep. Halfdan and his trading party had indeed been attacked by brigands, the same men who had pursued them through the forest. Several of Halfdan's guards had been killed, but most had escaped, regrouping before tracking the brigands in hope of finding Freydis. "They followed their trail directly to us," Freydis said. "Providence, Halfdan calls it. I think it was the god's will." Runa chewed thoughtfully. "The brigands seemed particularly intent on finding you, not just any victim." A shadow crossed Freydis's face. "Yes. Halfdan believes they may have been hired by rivals. His trading company has made powerful enemies competing for routes to Francia." The explanation made sense, yet something in Freydis's manner still struck Runa as evasive. Before she could probe further, however, the door to a side chamber opened and Gunnar emerged with a grim-faced healer. Runa rose immediately. "How is he?" "Holding his own," the healer replied. "I've drawn the infection, but much poison remains in his blood. The next day will determine his fate." "Can I see him?" Runa asked. Gunnar studied her with his penetrating single eye, then nodded once. Briefly. The chamber where Håkon lay was small but clean, warmed by a brazier in the corner. The tracker himself was barely recognizable, his powerful frame diminished by illness, his skin waxy with fever, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Fresh bandages wrapped his torso where Runa had stitched his wound. She approached quietly, settling on a stool beside his bed. In sleep, pain had stripped away Håkon's careful reserve, leaving his face vulnerable, almost young despite the weathering of years and grief. Runa felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. "You will not die, Håkon Eriksson," she whispered fiercely, taking his burning hand in hers. "Not after bringing me this far. Not after surviving what took your family. The Norns have not finished weaving your thread." Whether her words reached him through the fever, Runa couldn't say. But his fingers tightened fractionally around hers, a response that kindled hope in her heart. She stayed beside him until the healer insisted she return to her own rest. Reluctantly, she withdrew to the main hall, where she found Halfdan had returned from his council with Gunnar. The red-bearded merchant greeted her respectfully. "Lady Runa," he said, using the honorific though she had never introduced herself as such. "Gunnar tells me you are the widow of Bjorn Haraldsson, the blacksmith of Ravnholm." Runa nodded, surprised that Gunnar would know such details. "Your husband's work was known even here," Halfdan continued. "His blades were sought after for their quality. It is a great loss." The simple acknowledgement of Bjorn's skill, his worth beyond being her husband, touched Runa deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've spoken with Gunnar about arrangements," Halfdan continued. When you are recovered from your ordeal, we would be honored to escort you to Jorvik. The Jarl there would surely offer protection to the widow of such a valued craftsman, especially one carrying his child. The offer was generous, safer travel than she could hope for otherwise, with a respected merchant's introduction to the Q Jarl's court. Yet Runa found herself hesitating, her eyes straying toward the chamber where Håkon fought for his life. "I cannot leave until I know if he will survive," she said firmly. "He saved my life, multiple times." Halfdan nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her response. "Of course, we will remain in Ashby until the tracker's fate is decided." He paused, studying her with unexpected perception. "And perhaps by then, you will have decided your own path as well." 3 days passed in a strange limbo of waiting. Håkon's fever broke on the second night, his body finally turning the tide against infection. The healer declared him past the worst danger, though full recovery would take time. Runa divided her hours between resting, as her own condition demanded, and sitting with Håkon during his brief periods of consciousness. Their conversations were limited by his weakness, but each small exchange deepened the connection that had formed in the wilderness. She learned that he had been a respected warrior before becoming a tracker, that he had traveled as far as the eastern lands trading for furs and amber, that he had once dreamed of establishing his own settlement before grief turned him toward solitude. In turn, she shared stories of Ravnholm, of Bjorn's kindness, of her hopes for the child that grew within her. Neither spoke directly of the future, yet both seemed to recognize that something was taking shape between them, fragile as new ice on a pond, but present nonetheless. On the 4th day, Gunnar Thorvaldsson formally invited Runa to stay in Ashby, until her child was born. "Winter travel is no place for a woman near her time," he insisted. "Ashby would welcome a new life after so much death on our borders." The offer was generous and practical. Traveling to Jorvik, heavily pregnant during winter, carried significant risks. Yet Runa found herself looking to Håkon, seeking his counsel though she owed him no such deference. "Ashby is safe," he said simply, now strong enough to sit upright in bed. "Gunnar is a good man. The settlement thrives. Your child would be welcomed." "And you?" Runa asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider it. "Will you return to your solitary shelter when you've healed?" Something shifted in Håkon's gaze, a softening, a hesitation. "I had planned to," he admitted. "But plans change. Sometimes fate forces us to reconsider our paths. Sometimes fate gives us second chances," Runa said quietly, her hand finding his across the blanket. "If we have the courage to take them." Håkon's fingers intertwined with hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Courage I have never lacked," he said, a hint of his old strength returning to his voice. "It was hope that deserted me. Until recently." The simple admission contained multitudes, acknowledgement of loss, possibility of renewal, recognition of what had grown between them in their shared survival. Runa felt tears prick her eyes, not of grief, but of something lighter, brighter. "Then perhaps," she suggested softly, "we might find our courage and hope together, here in Ashby, at least until spring brings easier travel." "Until spring," Håkon agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "And then, we shall see what path the gods have laid before us." 1 month later, as the first hints of thaw softened the frozen ground, Runa stood at the palisade wall of Ashby, watching Håkon train with bow and axe in the practice yard below. His recovery had been remarkable once the fever broke, a testament to his innate strength and will to live. The jagged scar at his side would join the one on his face, another mark of survival against overwhelming odds. Halfdan and Freydis had departed for Jorvik 2 weeks prior, laden with promises of trade and alliance between the settlements. Before leaving, Freydis had embraced Runa warmly, whispering thanks for her friendship during their ordeal. Whatever secrets the red-haired woman might still harbor, Runa wished her well. The child kicked vigorously within her womb, as if eager to join the world that had nearly claimed its mother multiple times. Soon, Runa knew, her time would come. A new life would emerge from the ashes of Ravnholm, carrying Bjorn's legacy forward. Yet increasingly, she found herself contemplating a future beyond mere survival. Gunnar had offered her a permanent place in Ashby, a small house of her own, respect as a healer given her demonstrated skills with Hakon's wound. It was more than she could have hoped for after losing everything. And then there was Hakon. The tracker had accepted Gunnar's invitation to serve as Ashby's master of the hunt, guiding hunting parties and securing the settlement's borders. He had built a small cabin at the edge of the village, larger than necessary for one person, she had noted with private hope. They had not spoken formally of joining their lives. It was too soon, the wounds of their respective losses still healing. Yet something inevitable seemed to be drawing them together. Shared trauma transformed into shared understanding, shared survival blossoming into shared purpose. As if sensing her thoughts, Hakon looked up from the practice yard, finding her immediately among the watchers on the wall. He raised his hand in greeting, a gesture she returned without hesitation. Later, they would walk together along the forest edge, as had become their custom, speaking of small things and great ones, building trust one conversation at a time. Tache, child within her kicked again, stronger this time. Runa placed her hand over the movement, a smile touching her lips. This child would know stories of two fathers, Bjorn, who gave it life, and Hakon, who helped ensure that life continued. It would grow up knowing that even in a world of violence and loss, new beginnings remained possible. In the bitter winter of 873, Runa Sigurdsdottir had stumbled through snow-laden forests, the sole survivor of a brutal Saxon raid, carrying only death in her memories and life in her womb. Now, as winter released its grip on the land, she stood tall upon the walls of her new home, carrying hope for the future and the quiet certainty that sometimes, when the gods take everything, they create space for unexpected gifts to follow. If you've enjoyed this tale of Norse survival against all odds, of finding connection in the midst of tragedy, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Each week I bring you authentic Viking stories that capture the true spirit of our ancestors, their courage, their struggles, and their enduring legacy. Hit that subscribe button now, and you'll never miss an upload. Until our next journey together, through the mists of Nordic history, may the gods watch over your path.